I dropped my small overnight bag on the step of Grandpa Arthur's front porch, my fingers trembling so violently I nearly missed the doorbell. Papers from the thick folder of medical documents I had thrown together in panic tumbled onto the cold stone, scattering insurance forms and lists of prescriptions into the restless autumn wind. My chest burned from the sprint up the driveway after leaving the rental car haphazardly by the curb. Mom's frantic words replayed in my mind like a broken record. "Isabella, it's your dad. We think he had a stroke. You need to come immediately." Before I could take another breath, the door creaked open. There stood my grandfather, in his worn cardigan and holding a steaming mug of coffee. Silver brows arched in mild surprise. "Isabella? What on earth are you doing here?" My legs nearly gave way at the sight of him. "Grandpa, you're okay?" His eyes softened with confusion. "Of course I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" I stumbled into the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Mom called, she said you'd had a stroke." I was still in Denver, preparing for a critical presentation before the investment board. But I canceled everything and took the earliest flight out. His frown deepened as he set his cup gently on the small table by the door. "That's strange. I haven't spoken with your mother in several days." A chill spread down my spine like ice water. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. The proof was right there, posted only 2 hours earlier. My mother, my father, and my brother Jackson, lounging on a sunlit beach, glasses of margarita raised in cheer. The caption marked the location, Cabo San Lucas. I turned the glowing screen toward Grandpa. His confusion slowly melted into grim understanding. "They told me you couldn't come," he murmured. "Said you were buried in meetings, too busy to join them." My stomach clenched at the betrayal that hit like a punch. They had deceived us both. At 32, I had devoted years to double shifts, waiting tables through undergrad and grinding my way through an MBA, every expense paid by my own determination, while my parents fully funded Jackson's entire education. That same brother never held a real job until he was handed one at Reyes Retreats, the luxury hotel chain Grandpa had built brick by brick from nothing. Just 3 short months ago, my parents assured me I would take leadership of the brand new Seattle branch. I had proven myself countless times. Yet 2 weeks before its grand opening, the plan was abruptly scrapped. The role went to Jackson. "He simply has the right personality for hospitality," my father had explained dismissively, as if my loyalty and competence meant absolutely nothing. The shock in my chest hardened into fury. I dialed my mother, putting the call on speaker. She answered on the 5th ring, laughter and ocean waves echoing behind her. "I'm with Grandpa," I said, my voice steady though my pulse raced. "He's completely fine." Silence stretched for a moment. "Oh well, I must have misheard your father." "These things happen, sweetie." "Misheard?" My throat tightened. I swiped through their vacation photos again and asked evenly, "How's Cabo this time of year?" Another pause, longer this time. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Isabella, we invited you, but you're always too consumed with work." "That's interesting," I replied coolly, since I never received such an invitation. My gaze shifted to Grandpa, whose jaw was set in stone. "And you also told him I was too busy to visit." "Isabella, really, these things wouldn't spiral if you stayed closer to the family instead of obsessing over business." Grandpa extended his hand for the phone. I passed it to him. "Elena," he said, his tone steel beneath calmness, stronger than I had heard in years. "This isn't confusion, this is deceit." He ended the call without hesitation and returned the phone to me. "They've been at this a long time," Isabella driving wedges, keeping us apart. I followed him into his study, sunlight spilling through high windows, glinting off polished wood. "What do you mean?" I whispered. His shoulders sank as he lowered himself into his leather chair. "They've been stripping away my authority, ignoring my voice. Even though I'm the founder of this company. Just as they've been sidelining you in favor of Jackson." My stomach nodded. But you're still the majority shareholder, I insisted. On paper, yes. He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. But they've maneuvered behind my back and yours too. The realization washed over me like a tidal wave. Every late night at the office, every trip across the country, every sacrifice I made to prove my worth it was all irrelevant. They had never intended to treat me as an equal. I sank heavily into the chair opposite him. The truth rang bitter. My only ally in a family that had never wanted me to succeed was sitting here beside me. What do we do now? I whispered. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. We fight. Grandpa rose and moved toward the far wall, his steps measured. The air carried the scent of leather and faint aftershave. With deliberate motion, he slid aside a panel, revealing a hidden wall safe I had never noticed before. I had been gathering fragments of proof for many long months. Grandpa muttered, as he spun the safe's dial with steady, practiced movements. Never once did I imagine I would need to use this cash against my very own son. The heavy door finally swung open, and he drew out a thick manila folder stamped with the word confidential in bold red letters. These were copies of hidden financial transfers, trust agreements, and internal correspondence that Elena and Dean were certain he could never access. His voice quavered ever so slightly as he laid the folder carefully upon his polished mahogany desk. You'd better sit down for this, Isabella. My stomach twisted as I opened the folder. Bank ledgers. Withdrawal slips from my trust. Minutes from board meetings. My eyes blurred while I tried to comprehend the reality before me. This has to be wrong, I whispered, sliding a finger down a column filled with cold numbers. $2,100,000. My trust fund bled dry piece by piece. Arthur nodded grimly, his jaw locked. It was all spent to prop up Jackson's indulgences. The condo in Aspen. The yacht club membership. The consulting retainers that never produced one tangible result. My knees buckled and I fell into the nearest leather chair, the edges of the room tilting as I stared at a record of a payment $190,000 funneled to a law firm specializing in traffic cases. It was from Jackson's drunk driving accident last year. Arthur explained in a heavy tone. The one they claimed never occurred. A pedestrian was struck. My parents erased it with my money. I pushed down the nausea clawing at my throat as I unearthed another document. A draft contract transferring full ownership of Reyes Retreats to Jackson upon Arthur's death. Another $2,100,000 destined to be stolen from me. I need to call Diana, I whispered, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. Arthur nodded gravely. Your cousin might be the single attorney whose loyalty we can rely on. Diana answered on the third ring, her sharp voice filling the room through speakerphone. I spread the damning papers across the desk so she could see through video. Arthur stood steady beside me, one hand firm on my shoulder. These records are undeniable fraud, Diana declared, her legal tone cutting and confident. Look carefully at the dates. They match exactly with board sessions, where you were conveniently sent away to inspect other properties. She pointed to a document partially visible on her screen. That transfer to the Cayman account? That is not favoritism, Isabella. It is calculated fraud and a gross breach of fiduciary duty. Arthur slid another folder closer to the camera. What about these? Diana inhaled sharply. These are filings for a competency hearing. They were plotting to have you declared mentally unfit, Arthur. His face drained of color, and he gripped the desk until his knuckles whitened. My own son. But Diana pressed on, her voice hard as steel. It doesn't stop there. Tax evasion, secret offshore accounts. Minutes of board meetings falsified, her eyes fixed on me through the screen. They meant to strip everything from both of you. The weight of her revelation pressed heavily on my chest. My entire life, every holiday shift worked. Every class I paid through endless waitressing. Every sacrifice I made to stay loyal to our business was all built on sand, on deception. What happens if they succeed? My voice was dry, nearly gone. You lose absolutely everything, Diana said without hesitation. Not only the 2,100,000 already siphoned off, but your rightful role in the company, your inheritance, all of it. I thought bitterly about the New York opportunity. I had refused only 3 months earlier executive finance director at Harrison Hotels. A secure 6-figure salary. Substantial stock options. I had given it all up to remain tethered to this family empire. Arthur's voice was almost a whisper. If they win, you will face ruin, while Jackson indulges in the wealth born from my 50 years of blood and sweat. Diana's tone softened slightly. Isabella, if you challenge them, you must be ready to sever every remaining tie. You'll lose whatever illusion of family you still hold. A hollow laugh escaped me. What family? The people who spent decades feeding me lies? Arthur collapsed back into his chair, suddenly carrying the full weight of his 76 years. There is something else, he murmured, rubbing his chest absent-mindedly. My health isn't flawless. Early-stage heart trouble. Not immediately fatal, but enough. You need someone trustworthy. I finished quietly. He nodded, pulling yet another folder from his desk drawer. These papers make you my healthcare proxy and my financial power of attorney. If you're willing. My hand was steady now as I accepted the pen. Each signature I carved onto the pages was deliberate. A quiet triumph carved into the devastation. Responsibility settled on my shoulders not only for myself but for the man whose life's work my parents were determined to plunder. As I held the completed documents, questions churned in my head. Should I march forward and confront them directly, or should I build my strategy in silence, letting patience grant me the strength of surprise? The fantasy of exposing them publicly was delicious, but I knew the wisdom of waiting. 1 week later, the grand ballroom of the Paramount Hotel sparkled under chandeliers, filled with champagne glasses and forced laughter. I stood apart, half hidden by a potted palm, watching my parents smile for cameras as they introduced Jackson as the new chief executive officer of Reyes Retreats. My brother's grin was flawless, his speech rehearsed, filled with hollow promises of innovation and vision. Isabella, a colleague of mine, approached and stopped short. Oh, I thought you'd already resigned. I forced my expression into calm neutrality. Just restructuring my position. Her eyes flicked from my parents back to me. Well then. Good luck with whatever lies ahead. She drifted away before I could form a reply. The exchange echoed itself again and again. Repeated nearly 5 times before I slipped quietly through the service exit. Outside, my phone buzzed a text from our marketing director. Tomorrow's meeting cancelled. The 3rd cancellation in a single week. The next morning, a sharp notification from my bank blazed across my phone screen. One of the Sedona properties, part of the inheritance that was rightfully mine, had been sold without my knowledge or consent. To my horror, the documents listed my brother as the authorized agent handling the sale. My first call was to the family's longtime attorney, but all I reached was a bland voicemail. Desperate, I tried contacting the legal department at the company, only to be placed on hold. When the receptionist finally returned, her voice was clipped and rehearsed. My access had been suspended, she said, pending a so-called leadership transition. That very afternoon, Jackson appeared on the regional business report, his tone polished and his expression effortlessly confident. The company had suffered years of poor management, he announced smoothly. And sometimes true loyalty to family meant making difficult decisions. His words landed with the force of a physical blow. 10 years of endless 60-hour weeks, of abandoned vacations and postponed relationships, all swept away as if my devotion had been nothing but negligence. His performance for the cameras cut deeper than any private insult. When I returned to my apartment, I discovered my company email had locked me out, demanding a password I had never created. A call to the IT department confirmed my worst suspicion. The order had been approved by leadership. Sleep became a fleeting luxury in the days that followed. I lay awake into the small hours, recalculating my losses, dissecting conversations, and replaying every meeting in search of the warning signs I should have caught. The once tranquil space I called home turned into a prison, the walls pressing in tighter with each passing night. During one conference call I managed to slip into anonymously. A board member referred to me coldly as the Reyes situation. My hands shook so violently that I dropped my coffee mug, porcelain shattering across the hardwood floor. But the voices on the line continued without acknowledging my existence. My dining table soon transformed into a battlefield. Financial records sprawled across every surface, thick stacks of legal references beside my grandfather's original company charters. I drew timelines of every questionable choice, every unexplained transfer, until the fragments aligned into a clear pattern of betrayal that had been building quietly for years. The knock at my door came late on a Wednesday evening. Startled, I opened it to find Margaret, our family housekeeper of over 20 years, standing solemnly in the hallway. "Miss Isabella," she whispered, placing a tiny key into my hand. "Some things are terribly wrong. Your grandfather always told me silence is complicity." The moment I saw the key, I knew what it was. It opened the door to my father's private office. 3 nights later, while attending a family dinner only to keep appearances, I saw my chance. As my mother proudly guided guests through their newly renovated living room, I slipped away quietly. The key turned smoothly in the lock of my father's study. Inside, I moved with precision, pulling open filing cabinets and photographing every incriminating page, transfer authorizations, bearing forged signatures, backdated minutes from board meetings, and trust amendments signed by suspicious witnesses. After 15 tense minutes, the door burst open. My father stood there, his face darkening as realization struck. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice carried the same icy authority he had used when I was 8, and had scribbled crayon across his desk calendar. Without flinching, I continued photographing a memo so damning it made my pulse roar in my ears. "Finding the truth you've buried from me my entire life." He stepped closer, looming as he always had. But for the first time I didn't recoil. Instead, I stood taller. "Leave this office now before I call security," he hissed, grabbing for my arm. I raised my phone, the screen glowing with dozens of captured images. "Everything I need is already in my possession." The mask of paternal dominance slipped from his face, replaced by raw fear. And in that instant, something extraordinary washed over me. I realized I no longer cared about his disapproval. The sensation was so freeing I nearly laughed. "You've always underestimated me," I said quietly. "That was your greatest mistake." Later that same night, Diana's apartment looked like a command center. Papers blanketed every surface as she worked tirelessly, drafting motions and structuring filings. "I don't want payment," she said firmly when I offered compensation. "Consider this my repayment for 2 decades of cruelty they inflicted on my mother." Grandpa Arthur arrived soon after, carrying a weathered leather portfolio under his arm. Inside were the original company formation documents. "Your parents believed these had burned in last year's office fire," he explained grimly. Then Margaret called again, her whisper urgent. "There are more files hidden in the garden shed behind the pool house," she told me. "Underneath the floorboards. I've seen them conceal things there for years." This unlikely alliance, the overlooked and underestimated, stood with me not because of blood but because of shared truth and values. Their loyalty contrasted so sharply with my parents' manipulation that the clarity was almost painful. Together in Diana's kitchen, we finalized our plan. A forgotten clause in the company's founding contract allowed ownership to be revoked in cases of proven fraud. "There's something more," Diana added, sliding a folder across the table. "The FBI has already opened an investigation into Jackson's so-called accident, An agent confirmed they suspect bribery. The following morning, I walked through the gleaming glass doors of Reyes Retreats headquarters. The receptionist's eyes widened at the sight of me, but said nothing. My steps were firm as I moved toward the boardroom where the quarterly meeting had already begun. Behind me, 4 FBI agents advanced in silence, their presence sealing the fate of everything my parents had tried to steal. For the first time in what feels like endless months, a faint but genuine smile touches my lips. I step confidently into the boardroom of Reyes Retreats, my spine perfectly straight, every motion deliberate. The long mahogany table shines brilliantly beneath recessed lights, throwing reflections across the stunned expressions of the board members. Behind me, FBI agents file in with quiet authority, their presence undeniable. My mother's champagne glass halts midway to her lips, frozen. Jackson's practiced smirk collapses into uncertainty, while my father lurches to his feet so quickly that his chair scrapes against the polished hardwood. "What is the meaning of this, Isabella?" he demands sharply, his voice trembling between anger and fear. I set my leather portfolio onto the table with a measured calm. "I am here to present evidence of grave financial misconduct within Reyes Retreats." The room falls utterly silent. With steady hands, I pull a thick stack of papers from the portfolio and distribute them to each board member. Gone forever is the daughter who once trembled under her family's scrutiny. Standing in her place is a woman fortified by evidence no one can deny. These statements outline systemic fraud dating back more than 5 years, I say clearly. My tone composed even though my pulse races. On page 3, you will find proof that $2,100,000 from my personal trust were siphoned into unauthorized accounts. On page 7, company resources were diverted to cover Jackson's drunk driving incident from last year. Patricia Morton, a senior board member, adjusts her glasses, her eyes widening as the numbers sink in. "This is outrageous," my father erupts, his face flushing deep red. "These papers are obvious forgeries." I continue undeterred, refusing to acknowledge his interruption. Arthur's original contract contains a clause regarding ethics in leadership. I point to the highlighted passage. It specifies that if evidence of fraudulent or unethical conduct is produced, ownership may be revoked. Board Chairman Richard Donovan leans forward, his thick eyebrows knitting together. "Dean, these allegations carry enormous weight." "They are also entirely true," I respond firmly. "I am formally requesting a vote to remove my parents and Jackson from leadership, effective immediately." The CFO slowly slides his chair back from my father, a gesture subtle but heavy with meaning. 2 other board members glance at one another, then close their folders in silent agreement. Jackson explodes to his feet, knocking over his glass of water, sputtering. "This is insane. She invented all of this out of envy because Dad chose me to lead." A man in a dark suit steps from the line of agents. "Mr. Reyes, I am Special Agent Becker. We have independent documentation concerning the Aspen incident, including proof of the $190,000 settlement paid to the victim's family using company funds." Jackson's complexion drains of color, his bravado cracking. My mother rises slowly, smoothing the front of her silk blouse with unsteady fingers. "This is a family matter. One that should be resolved privately," she insists. I move that this meeting adjourn immediately. Chairman Donovan clears his throat. "Elena, misusing corporate funds for personal gain is exactly why we are here." Another board member, Martin Wright, who has shared golf games with my father for over 2 decades, turns to him, suspicion now sharpening his gaze. "Dean, tell me honestly, was the Sedona expansion property authorized properly?" My father's silence, combined with the sweat gathering at his temples, speaks volumes. When the chairman asks me directly if I want my family arrested or merely stripped of control, I hesitate for the briefest moment. Would true justice be served by public disgrace? or by quietly reclaiming what was rightfully mine while preserving some fragment of the Reyes name? The answer is interrupted when the door opens slowly. Grandpa Arthur enters, leaning on his cane, his silver hair shining under the lights. Despite his frail body, his presence alone commands the room. Instantly, every whisper stops. "I founded this company half a century ago," he declares, his voice strong, echoing off the walls. "It was built on integrity, not deceit." Diana follows him, her confidence radiating as she carries a sleek leather case. She sets it on the table. "These are the legal transfers assigning Arthur's controlling shares to Isabella Reyes," she announces. "They are signed, notarized, and effective as of this morning." Gasps ripple through the board. Then Margaret, our long-serving housekeeper, steps forward from near the doorway. My mother's mouth falls open in disbelief at her presence here. "I have seen documents deliberately destroyed inside the Reyes home," Margaret states boldly, her voice unwavering. "Financial records, contracts, correspondence, all burned at Mr. Dean Reyes's command. But I kept records, dates, and descriptions." The chairman examines the transfer papers, then turns to my grandfather. "Arthur, are you absolutely certain?" "More certain than anything I have ever decided," my grandfather replies with conviction. The vote is swift and unanimous. In an instant, my parents and Jackson are stripped of every position within the company. I stand now at the head of the table, occupying the very place my father commanded only minutes earlier. The weight of the responsibility settles onto me, but it does not crush. It feels instead like a mantle I was always destined to bear. Across the room, Jackson's once arrogant smile collapses into stunned despair as his eyes dart frantically for an ally, finding none. My mother's mascara streaks down her cheeks as she whispers, "This will destroy everything." But the board, having seen the evidence, remains unmoved. My father slowly pushes back his chair, rising stiffly to his feet. "This meeting is finished. We will be fighting these baseless accusations," my father declares, his voice louder than usual, as he pushes away from the table. But before he can leave, 2 FBI agents step neatly into his path. "Dean Reyes, we have several questions regarding potential tax evasion and the misuse of company funds," Agent Becker states firmly. I collect the folders before me and address the board in a calm but unshakable tone. "Tomorrow morning at 9, I am calling for an emergency company-wide meeting. Every single employee has the right to understand what is happening and to know that their jobs remain secure." I let my gaze lock with my father's. From this moment on, things will be very different here. A few hours later, my phone lights up with a message that carries the weight of desperation. "We need to talk before this escalates any further." Dad's office, 7 a.m. I delete my mother's words without replying, yet I already know I will attend. Not because they deserve it, but because I want to look them in the eyes when the truth can no longer be denied. At precisely 7, I step into my father's office. The once imposing space feels oddly diminished now, shrunken by the lies it has housed. My parents and Jackson rise as I enter. My father sits stiffly behind his desk, posture forced rather than commanding. My mother clutches a crumpled tissue, her eyes swollen and red. Jackson paces by the window, stopping abruptly when he sees me. "Isabella, sit down," my father urges, his voice softened unnaturally. "We need to explain." I remain standing. "I have listened to your explanations my entire life," I say evenly. My mother dabs at her face. "You are overreacting. Everything we have done has always been for your good." The words sting less than they once would have. Was it for my good when you drained my inheritance? Or when you tried to declare Grandpa incompetent? My father spreads his hands in a gesture meant to pacify. "We can resolve this. We'll issue a public apology. You can share control of the Seattle properties. In return, you drop the more damaging charges." My mother's voice hardens, the sobs slipping into steel. Think carefully, Isabella. This scandal will destroy the empire your grandfather created. When I do not waver, she changes tactics. Your behavior proves you are not fit to lead. Arthur's judgment was clouded when he gave you those shares. Perhaps it is time to revisit his competency evaluation. The old Isabella would have recoiled. Today, I smile. I've already met with our major investors. I reply, pulling a folder from my briefcase. They know everything and have pledged their full support for my leadership. I spread statements from hotel staff across the desk. Here are testimonials describing the improvements since I assumed operations last week. Turns out people work better when they aren't terrified of losing their jobs for speaking the truth. My father reaches for the papers, but I draw them back deliberately. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to inform you. I stand taller, no longer shrinking beneath their shadows. For 32 years you pretended to support me while undermining me at every step. You promised me the Seattle branch only to hand it to Jackson. You funded his education while I worked endless shifts to pay for mine. You stripped me of my inheritance under the pretense of responsibility. I do not need your approval, because I never actually had it. Jackson bursts from his silence, shoving away from the window. This is absurd. You can't possibly. I cut him off, my voice sharper. You have two choices. Face full charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, or step aside permanently. Surrender all claims to this business and return what you've stolen. I glance at my watch. You have until 9, when the company meeting begins, to decide. Hours later, the grand atrium of Reyes Retreats headquarters pulses with anxious energy as employees flood the space. Morning sunlight streams through the glass ceiling, illuminating the gathered crowd. I watch my parents and Jackson slip in through a side entrance, their badges reactivated temporarily. Taking the stage, I adjust the microphone, my voice carrying across the hushed atrium. Thank you all for coming today. I am Isabella Reyes, and as of yesterday, I have assumed control of Reyes Retreats following overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct by prior management. A wave of murmurs spreads. From the corner of my vision, I see my father's scowl tighten, but I continue. My first action as CEO is to initiate a full restructuring of our company. I pause, letting my gaze sweep across the faces of employees who once barely acknowledged me. Effective immediately, we are implementing profit sharing for all employees with more than 1 year of service. Gasps ripple into excited whispers. And there is more. I add, gesturing toward the back. Margaret Franklin? Would you please come forward? Margaret steps out from the shadows, her modest shoes clicking against the marble. She has been part of this company longer than I have been alive, always unseen, always steadfast. Margaret is being promoted to executive housekeeper, overseeing all Reyes Retreats properties. Her first responsibility will be to ensure every housekeeper earns a living wage. Applause breaks out, echoing through the atrium. My mother's mouth twists in disbelief. Margaret had been invisible to her. Just the help. I raise my voice once more. Finally, I am creating the Arthur Vernon Scholarship Fund for the children of our employees. Education changed my life. Now it will change theirs. Because true family is not built on manipulation or deceit, it is built on loyalty, respect, and opportunity. As I finish speaking, a group of maintenance workers quietly wheel a cart toward the far lobby wall where, for more than 15 years, my parents' grand portraits have hung in gilded frames. With careful hands, they lift the heavy canvases down, wrapping them for storage, and replace them with a candid photograph of Grandpa Arthur and me laughing together at last year's Christmas party. The contrast is striking. Gone are the solemn faces of control, replaced by joy and authenticity. When the meeting concludes, employees who once walked past me without acknowledgement now come forward eagerly, offering congratulations, suggestions, and genuine optimism for the future. Near the exit, my parents and Jackson remain rooted in place, their access badges already void. effectively locking them out of the empire they once believed was unshakably theirs. By late afternoon, whispers spread across the office like wildfire about the settlement my parents signed. The rumors suggest heavy financial penalties are certain, with the added threat of prison sentences if they attempt to break the terms. That same day, while I am reviewing development proposals for the Seattle property, my assistant knocks softly. "Your brother is here. He insists on seeing you." Against my better judgment, curiosity sparks. Jackson enters without his usual swagger. No parents shadowing him. No smirk to disguise vulnerability. For the first time since childhood, he meets my eyes directly. "I didn't know," he murmurs, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Not about any of it." I swear. I set my pen aside and study him, uncertain what future awaits a family torn apart by lies. 1 year later, I swipe through the final slides of my quarterly presentation, double-checking numbers before the board arrives. In 12 months under my leadership, Reyes Retreats has posted profits that have risen by 22%. Not a bad accomplishment for the daughter they once dismissed as unworthy. The boardroom door opens, and executives file in. These same individuals who once barely acknowledged me now greet me with firm handshakes, calling me by name with genuine respect. Only 6 months ago, industry leaders ignored my presence. Today, 3 prestigious hotel journals have requested exclusive interviews. Let's begin. I say, my voice clear and commanding, free of the hesitation that once plagued it. After the meeting, I walk through our flagship resort, pausing to speak with Carmen about her son's college application. The scholarship committee meets next week. Be sure his documents are submitted, I remind her. "Thank you, Miss Reyes," she says, smiling. "I never would have mentioned my children under your father's rule." The Arthur Vernon Scholarship Fund, which began as a modest tribute, has now supported 38 employees' children this year alone. As I greet the housekeeping team by name, Maria, Thomas, Lena, their surprised smiles remind me how invisible my parents once made them feel. Later that evening, at the annual gala, the chandeliers sparkled just as they did last year, but everything else feels transformed. I smooth my emerald gown, no longer blending into shadows as I once did. This year's Hotelier of the Year has driven extraordinary growth while pioneering revolutionary employee benefits. The announcer proclaims. My name is called, and applause erupts like a storm. Exactly 1 year earlier, in this very ballroom, they crowned Jackson CEO. Now I stand at the same podium, holding the weight of the Crystal Award in my hands. Success isn't measured by what you own, I say into the microphone, steady and sure. It is defined by the legacy of integrity you leave behind. This honor belongs to every employee who entrusted me with their future. In the crowd, Grandpa Arthur's eyes glisten with pride. My grandfather taught me that true leadership is earned through service, not passed down through entitlement. It's a lesson I live by each day. 2 weeks later, Arthur lifts his glass at Diana's lakeside home. Margaret sits beside him, her posture softer now in well-earned retirement. Candlelight flickers across Arthur's silver hair as we celebrate the first anniversary of rebuilding the company. To the family we choose, Diana offers. To integrity restored, Margaret adds warmly. Arthur studies me with a look of deep pride as I share our ambitious plans for a Miami expansion. You've surpassed every expectation, Isabella, not just as a businesswoman, but as a leader, he says. The following Monday, autumn sunlight streams through my office window as I examine blueprints for our next innovation. Boutique hotels built around employee well-being centers, properties designed to value staff welfare as highly as guest experience. My assistant enters quietly, handing me a cream-colored envelope delivered by courier. Inside lies a letter from Jackson. He describes the restaurant venture he has launched in Seattle's Second Table District, employing those in need of redemption, former inmates, recovering addicts, survivors of abuse. I learned from watching you rebuild what our parents tried to destroy, he writes. Perhaps someday we could talk again. Now, I set the letter beside the photograph that always rests on my desk. Grandpa Arthur at 25, standing proudly in front of his very first hotel, clutching the business plan written in his careful script. Next to it rests my own vision for Reyes Retreats' future. A vision grounded not in favoritism and deceit, but in fairness and respect. As I read Jackson's words, I find myself caught between the fragile hope of reconciliation and the necessity of protecting the life I have rebuilt. Can fractured family bonds truly be mended after such betrayal? Or is it wiser to honor the lessons of the past and move forward, cherishing what was good but letting go of what was poisoned? What would you choose?